They said I was too weak to notice, too tired to care, too old to fight back. But I heard every word. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when my children gathered around the kitchen table, the same oak table I bought 35 years ago after my first real contract. Back then, I thought wood would last longer than promises. Turns out, promises rot faster. I sat at the head of the table, a blanket around my shoulders, coughing into a folded napkin. My son, Victor, leaned toward me with that false sweetness he picked up from watching politicians on TV. "Dad," he said softly, "we just want to make things easier for you. No more stress about bills, no more worrying about paperwork. You can just rest." Rest. That word felt like a shovel of dirt tossed on a coffin. His sister, Marlene, slid a stack of papers toward me. Neat columns, official stamps, the sharp smell of ink still fresh. "It's just routine," she said. "Transferring some assets into our names so we can manage things while you're at the nursing facility. Temporary. All legal. All in the family." All lies. I picked up the pen with a trembling hand, made sure it trembled just enough. My eyes watered, not from weakness but from rage I kept hidden. I signed where they pointed, initials here, signature there. The way they rushed me told me everything I needed to know. When the last page slid back across the table, my youngest, Brian, exhaled in relief, like a man who had just won the lottery. "You won't regret this, Dad," he said, slapping me on the back with a little too much force. "We'll take good care of everything." That night, I was moved out. No family dinner. No last walk through the house I built. Just a cab ride to a 2-story nursing home off Route 19, tucked between a pawn shop and a gas station. The walls smelled like bleach and boiled cabbage. The nurse at the desk mispronounced my name, didn't look up from her clipboard when she handed me a key to a shared room. "This will be your new home," she said. Home. I almost laughed. I lay on the thin mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling tiles, and let their words replay in my head. "He's old. He doesn't understand. He won't last long anyway." But I understood plenty. I remembered every deal I'd ever closed. Every late night with blueprints spread across the table. Every loan I paid back in cash because banks didn't trust a man with calloused hands. I remembered how I built a business brick by brick, handshake by handshake, while they were still learning how to spell their names. And I remembered something they had conveniently forgotten. 10 years ago, when the company nearly collapsed, I created a safety net. Accounts in Delaware, in Nevada, in places they'd never think to check. Silent partners who owed me favors. A lawyer who promised to keep one folder locked away until I said the word. I had not said it yet, but I would. The next morning, I shuffled to the pay phone near the lobby. My roommate snored like a chainsaw behind me, but I didn't care. I dialed a number I hadn't used in 15 years. When the line clicked, a familiar voice answered. "Mr. Carver," he said cautiously. "It's time," I replied. There was silence, then a chuckle. "I wondered how long you'd let them play their little game." I hung up without another word. That afternoon, a black car pulled up outside the nursing home. Nobody there paid attention. Residents came and went for doctor appointments all the time. But this wasn't a doctor. This was Mr. Aldridge, my old lawyer, still sharp in his tailored suit, his eyes glinting like steel. He shook my hand, firm, unpitying. "You're ready?" I nodded. More than ready. We sat together in the cramped dining hall, ignoring the watery stew served in plastic bowls. I laid out everything. The forged signatures I'd been tricked into, the accounts they thought didn't exist, the trust deed no one remembered but me. Aldridge smiled. "They think you're powerless. That's the best advantage a man can have." As I returned to my room, I passed by the rec area where a television droned on about some celebrity wedding. My children were celebrating, too. They thought they had already inherited. I could almost see them popping champagne in my dining room, laughing about the old man they'd tucked away. They thought the story was finished, but I was just turning the page. That night, before I slept, I pulled a small notebook from my drawer. I wrote down each of their names: Victor, Marlene, Brian. Then beneath each name, I listed their weaknesses. Debts, affairs, secrets whispered over the years when they thought I wasn't listening. They wanted to strip me of dignity. Instead, I would strip them bare in front of the world. I closed the notebook, tucked it under my pillow, and smiled in the dark. They buried me in paperwork. They buried me in shame. But they forgot something important. I'm still breathing. And the next time they see me, I'll make sure it takes the air right out of their lungs. The first rule of revenge is patience. The second, never show them you're awake. I spent the next days perfecting the art of weakness. I shuffled slower down the hallway of the nursing home, let the nurses spoon watery oatmeal into my bowl, even pretended to nod off mid-conversation when Victor visited. He patted my shoulder like a man comforting a loyal dog that had finally gone deaf. I smiled with cracked lips, let him believe the act. The weaker I looked, the bolder they became. And boldness always leaves fingerprints. Behind their backs, I worked. Every morning, after breakfast, I slipped into the phone alcove near the vending machines. It smelled of burnt coffee and disinfectant. Nobody looked twice at an old man making a call. Most of us were begging relatives for visits that never came. But I wasn't begging. I was building. The first call was to Aldridge, my lawyer. His voice came smooth as polished stone. Everything's in place. Do you want me to move yet? Not yet, I said. We start with shadows. I need to see what they do when the lights flicker. The second call was to Sam Whitaker, a man who once hauled crates for me back when I still had more muscle than gray hair. Now he worked as a private investigator, though he still smelled like machine oil and Marlboros. Mr. Carver, he said when he picked up, didn't expect to hear from you again. You still good at finding dirt? A low chuckle. Better than ever. I gave him 3 names. My children. My betrayers. Find me what they don't want the world to see. Within a week, he delivered. The manila envelope he slid across the diner booth looked ordinary. Inside, it was dynamite. Photos, receipts, fragments of conversations recorded in bars. Victor at a backroom poker table, money stacked like towers. Marlene's signature on phantom invoices for consulting work, shell companies siphoning cash. Brian leaning too close to another man's wife in a hotel lobby, sloppy with liquor. I stared at each piece like I was holding shards of glass. Sharp, dangerous, but exactly what I needed. Sam sipped his coffee. You gonna bury them? Not yet, I said. First I need them to dig the hole themselves. That's when Aldridge set the next stage in motion. We drafted quiet legal filings. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make them sweat. Notices of review. Letters about pending audits. Small sparks tossed into dry grass. Each one delivered with just enough formality to rattle, but not accuse. The response was predictable. Marlene called me that night. Her voice coated in sugar, but trembling underneath. Dad, she said, you may get a letter about some financial questions, but it's nothing serious. Just routine. Routine, I echoed, letting my voice shake like a man confused. Do I need to do anything? No, it's all handled. She hung up too quickly. That was the sound of guilt. Victor's test was harsher. We arranged a call that sounded like a banker checking on overdue payments. He cracked within minutes, his tone jumping from charm to fury to panic. He thought he was still running the show. He had no idea the curtain ropes were already in my hands. Brian was easier. All it took was one anonymous message, hinting that someone had photos of him in that hotel. By midnight, he was calling everyone he knew, desperate to plug leaks that hadn't even started. Watching him thrash in paranoia was almost too easy. Almost. Because this was never about small wins. This was about the final strike. While they scrambled, Aldridge and I built the foundation, literally. The Carver Foundation for Community Progress. Plain name, no fanfare. On paper, just another nonprofit for scholarships and grants. In reality, it was my fortress. Every account they thought they'd stolen had already been shifted, brick by brick, into that structure. All legal, all sealed, all untouchable. One evening, Aldridge leaned across the table, his eyes catching the low light. When we file the last transfer, they'll wake up to find the cupboard bare. Good, I said. I want them hungry when I serve the next course. He raised an eyebrow. And what's that? The truth, I answered. Because revenge isn't just taking back what was stolen. It's showing them the mirror they've avoided all their lives. The timing lined up perfectly. They decided to throw a party, a grand showcase to parade their inheritance. Crystal glasses, designer suits, speeches rehearsed in bathroom mirrors. They sent invitations like kings announcing a coronation. I received one too. Out of courtesy, out of arrogance, maybe both. They addressed it to Mr. Carver, retired. Retired. That word made me laugh out loud. I placed the card on my nightstand and studied it for a long time. Let them drink. Let them dance. Let them believe they're celebrating a victory. They don't know I've already written the ending. And when I walk through those doors, it won't be as the weak, old man they discarded. It will be as the ghost they buried too soon. I closed my notebook that night, wrote one final line under their names. Tomorrow, the mask comes off. They built the party like a shrine. Gold-trimmed invitations, polished speeches, champagne bottles stacked like monuments to greed. I wasn't supposed to be there. That's what made my arrival matter. The nursing home bus rattled down Main Street that evening, carrying half-asleep residents to a church social. I didn't board. I stepped off early, my cane clicking against the sidewalk. I wasn't leaning on it. I just liked the sound. Sharp, measured, a metronome for what was coming. The Carver mansion glowed like a stage. Lights strung across the lawn, laughter spilling from the porch, music humming low like anticipation itself. Cars lined both sides of the street. Luxury sedans, leased SUVs, vehicles polished so hard the headlights looked like open eyes. I stood across the street for a long moment. The air smelled of roasted meat and perfume. Somewhere a cork popped, followed by applause. My children's voices blended into the noise, smooth and confident. They thought the world was theirs. Not for long. Inside, the party was a performance. Victor stood at the center, glass in hand, retelling the story of how he had secured our family's future. Marlene clung to his arm like a stage partner, adding flourishes about the company's new era. Brian was already too red in the face, slurring compliments to guests he wanted to impress. None of them noticed me at first. An old man slipping through the doorway isn't spectacle when everyone is chasing cameras. But the moment silence cracked across the room, I knew they had seen me. Dad? Marlene's voice pitched too high. She blinked as if I were a ghost. Victor frowned, his glass frozen midair. What are you doing here? I smiled, slow and deliberate. I had dressed for this moment. Crisp suit, polished shoes, tie knotted tight. Not the shuffling relic they thought they had buried in paperwork, but the man who built the house beneath their feet. I came, I said evenly, to watch history repeat itself. The crowd shifted. Curious faces turned toward me. Phones slipped out of pockets. Nothing feeds a town faster than scandal at a family gathering. Victor tried to recover. My father's not well, he announced to the room, that fake charm dripping. He gets confused sometimes. Confused? I cut him off. My voice carried, stronger than they remembered. I know exactly who signed what. I know exactly what you stole. And I know exactly what you're about to lose. The silence that followed was different this time. Heavy. Electric. The kind that tastes like rain just before lightning strikes. I raised the folder in my hand. Aldridge had delivered it that morning, neatly bound. Transfers. Trust deeds. Articles of incorporation. All filed, all stamped, all legal. This, I said, shaking it once for effect, is the Carver Foundation. Established years ago. Every account, every deed, every future profit. It all belongs to the community now. Not you. Gasps. A murmur spread like fire through dry grass. Marlene's smile collapsed. You're lying. I opened the folder, held up the notarized signature for all to see. I don't lie. Not anymore. Brian staggered forward, red blotches spreading across his neck. You can't do this. I already did, I said. The crowd buzzed louder. Phones flashed. Somewhere in the back, a reporter scribbled in a notebook. My children's reputations were bleeding out in real time. But I wasn't done. This was only the blade's first edge. I leaned closer, let my voice drop low enough for them to hear, but sharp enough to cut through the noise. You thought money was all I had left to take from you. But I've kept more than you ever realized. Secrets. Proof. Every crack you've tried to plaster over. And when I show those to the world, your names won't be worth the paper they're printed on. Victor's hand trembled. Marlene's lips parted like a caught liar. Brian muttered a curse under his breath. I stepped back, letting their fears settle into the room. Enjoy your party, I said. It's the last one you'll host as Carvers. I turned, cane tapping the marble floor, and walked toward the exit. Behind me, their voices rose, panic, denial, threats. The music had stopped. The champagne lost its sparkle. The celebration curdled into dread. And I hadn't even begun to show them everything. I didn't go back to the nursing home that night. I went to the old warehouse office downtown, the one my children thought I had sold years ago. The dust was thick, the windows grimy, but the lock still turned for me. Inside, the air smelled of oil and paper. The safe was still there, hidden behind a rusted filing cabinet. My hands didn't shake when I spun the dial. Click. Inside were the archives. Contracts. Letters. Old journals where I wrote everything I never dared to say aloud. Proof that memory wasn't my weakness. It was my weapon. I spread the files across the desk under a single hanging bulb. Victor's debts. Marlene's fake companies. Brian's affairs and unpaid taxes. Each sheet of paper was a nail, and together they built the coffin of their reputations. But something else was in there too. A letter. Handwritten. Aldrich had warned me about it. It wasn't from a stranger, it was from Marlene. I read slowly, the ink tilting on the page like a hurried confession. She had written it years ago, back when she borrowed money behind her husband's back. She used me as collateral, promised to repay, but never did. Worse, she admitted in her own words that Victor had helped her cover it up by falsifying signatures in my name. The betrayal wasn't just greed, it was conspiracy. They hadn't just stolen from me. They had stolen together. I folded the letter back into the envelope and sat there a long time. My chest didn't hurt. My hands didn't tremble. I felt nothing but cold clarity. Family. That word had rotted. The next morning, Aldrich arranged a meeting with a journalist from the Herald Ledger. Not a gossip reporter. A real one. She wore a dark coat and carried a notebook, her pen tapping like a clock. "You ready to go public?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "First, I want to see how fast they'll turn on each other once they sense the ground moving." She smirked. "They'll eat one another alive." "Good," I said. "Let them." And right on cue it started. Victor stormed into my room at the nursing home 2 nights later, eyes bloodshot, voice raw. "Marlene says you forged those transfers. That you're working with Aldrich to scam us. She says she has proof." I almost laughed. Proof? Of what? Her own guilt scribbled in shaky ink? Instead, I leaned back on the thin mattress and whispered, "Victor, you really think your sister wouldn't throw you to the wolves to save her own skin?" His face twitched. "She wouldn't," but he didn't finish. Because he knew she would. By the end of the week, Brian called me. Not in anger, but desperation. His voice cracked through the line. "Dad, listen, if you can stop Victor and Marlene, I'll back you. Just leave me out of it." Leave him out of it. As if betrayal could be partitioned like property lines. I didn't answer. I let the silence do the work. One child already pointing fingers. Another begging for mercy. And Marlene? She hadn't called once. Which meant she was plotting something bigger. That suspicion was confirmed when Sam, my investigator, slid another envelope across the diner booth. This time, inside wasn't just photographs. It was a contract draft and signed, but damning. Marlene had reached out to sell her share of the business, my business, to a rival company across the state. She was prepared to cut her own brothers out entirely, take the payout, and vanish. Blood doesn't bind thieves. Greed unbinds them faster than fire. I tucked the contract into my coat pocket, folded my hands on the table, and smiled. The house of Carver was already cracking. I just had to press. That night, as I wrote in my notebook, I realized something. Revenge wasn't about striking once. It was about turning them against themselves, leaving me as the last man standing. And with the evidence I held, it was only a matter of time before the first one broke publicly. It started with Victor. It always had to. The eldest. The one who strutted through rooms like a king wearing a borrowed crown. 2 weeks after the party, the story broke. Front page of the Herald Ledger. Headline sharp as a blade. Carver Enterprises under quiet audit. Fraud allegations surface. I bought 2 copies from the gas station down the road. The clerk glanced at me, then at the paper, then back. Recognition flickered. I just smiled and walked out. By noon, the phones at Victor's office were ringing off the hook. Sam told me he was shouting at staff, shredding documents, barking orders he couldn't control. By sunset, 3 board members resigned. By midnight, a creditor froze one of his lines of credit. I imagined him sitting in his glossy office, staring at the city skyline, realizing the walls weren't glass anymore, they were mirrors. Marlene wasn't silent either. She sent me a letter, scribbled in fury. "You'll ruin us all." For what? Revenge? I folded it neatly and slipped it under the letter she had written years ago, the one that damned her. 2 confessions, stacked like bricks. Her words had built her prison long before I ever touched them. Brian fell next. Not financially, not yet. Socially. The photos Sam captured surfaced online. Brian stumbling out of a hotel with another man's wife. Local gossip sites lit up. His friends stopped answering his calls. His buddies at the country club laughed behind his back, then uninvited him. When he showed up at my nursing home room, he looked hollow. Dark circles under his eyes, shirt untucked, hands shaking. "Dad," he whispered, "please, just stop this. I'll make it right. I'll apologize." I leaned forward, letting the silence stretch until he squirmed. Then I said, "You never apologize until you're already drowning. That's not apology. That's begging for air." He dropped his head into his hands. I watched him crumble, and I felt nothing but a cool satisfaction. But the true firestorm came from Marlene. Her secret deal leaked, proof of her plan to sell the business to rivals. Victor raged. Brian screamed. The siblings turned on each other like wolves in a cage. Their arguments spilled into public view. Neighbors heard. Reporters printed it. A family dynasty unraveling, thread by thread, under the brightest lights in town. And me? I sat in my narrow bed at the nursing home, sipping cheap coffee, while the empire I built collapsed in their hands. It should have been enough. But revenge isn't satisfied with cracks. It wants collapse. That night, Aldridge laid the final folder on my table. Inside, legal motions prepared for court, formal announcements of the Carver Foundation's control of every last asset. All stamped, all final. "When you sign these," he said, "the world will know. They'll be left with nothing but debts and disgrace." I looked at the papers, looked at the pen, then at him. "File them," I said. "But don't tell my children yet." "Why not?" I smiled. Cold. Certain. Because I want to be the one who delivers the news. And deliver it I would. In front of their friends. Their allies. The same people they had used to gloat. When the final strike landed, they wouldn't just lose money. They would lose face. Forever. They thought they still had time. Time to clean their names. Time to charm the public. Time to spin the story before it crushed them. But time was mine now. The invitation arrived on cream cardstock, embossed letters glinting in silver. Carver Family Gala. A celebration of legacy. The audacity made me laugh so hard the nurse peeked in to check if I was choking. Victor was desperate enough to host a spectacle, a show of strength after weeks of headlines and whispers. He rented the Grand Oak Ballroom at the Belmont Hotel, a place with chandeliers that could blind and carpets so thick they swallowed footsteps. He wanted the town to see that the Carvers were still standing. He forgot that I was already inside the foundation of that house, loosening the beams. The night came. The hotel glittered with lights. Guests filed in wearing black ties and sequins, clutching flutes of champagne, murmuring about scandals and voices sweetened with curiosity. I let them talk. By dawn, their gossip would turn into gospel. I arrived alone, in a dark suit that fit me better than they expected. No Kane tonight. My children froze when I walked through the doors. The room's hum faltered, just for a breath, just long enough for everyone to feel the shift. Victor recovered first, forcing a smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, "my father, here to see his legacy live on." His legacy, not mine. His. I moved slowly, savoring the silence. Then I stepped onto the small stage where he stood behind a podium. He tried to block me with his body. I put a hand on his shoulder and pressed. Not hard, but enough to remind him who built his bones. He stepped aside. The microphone crackled. I looked out at the faces. Bankers, lawyers, old neighbors. Men who shook my hand 30 years ago when I signed my first deal. They were hungry for truth. My children, I began, voice steady, have been celebrating an inheritance they never earned. A murmur swept through the crowd. I raised the folder in my hand. Same one, different weight. Tonight it carried more than transfers. It carried rot. For months, they've told you they own what I built. But here's the truth. I snapped open the folder, held up stamped documents under the glow of the chandelier. Every asset, every property, every dollar. It belongs to the Carver Foundation. Signed, sealed, irrevocable. They own nothing. Gasps. Phones lifted. The room buzzed like a hive cracked open. Victor lunged forward. Don't listen. He's sick. He's lying. I held up a second sheet. Lying? This is Marlene's confession, her letter admitting fraud, with Victor's help. Her handwriting. Her signature. Marlene's face drained of color. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Is that true?" Before she could answer, I pulled another paper. And Brian. Photos. Receipts. Hotel bills. His reputation already stains your doorstep. Brian stumbled back, hands raised as if to push the evidence away. The whispers grew into shouts. Guests filmed, recorded, broadcast live. Their shame was no longer private. It was performance. I leaned into the microphone. You see, revenge doesn't need a weapon. It only needs the truth. And tonight, truth belongs to me. The room erupted. Some guests laughed cruelly. Others walked out shaking their heads. A banker who once courted Victor muttered, "We're done here." Reporters scribbled so fast the air buzzed with ink. My children stood frozen, stripped bare before the same people they once sought to impress. I closed the folder with a snap that echoed like a gunshot. This family thought it inherited wealth. What it inherited is disgrace. Then I stepped down, leaving the podium empty, the chandeliers still burning, the music long dead. As I passed the exit, I heard Marlene's voice crack. "We can fix this. We can." But the words drowned under the sound of guests leaving, their footsteps heavy as judgment. I walked into the night air, cool and clean, and for the first time in years, I felt taller than the shadows. And still, this was not the end. Because I hadn't yet shown them the final ledger, the one where I exposed not just their greed, but the rot inside their very names. That revelation would be the killing blow. Collapse doesn't come like thunder. It comes like rot. Quiet. Certain. Irreversible. The morning after the gala, their empire lay in pieces. Victor's phone lit up with calls he couldn't dodge. Creditors, board members, regulators. By noon, his office door was locked, his nameplate quietly removed. The same men who once toasted him now muttered fraud under their breath. I imagined him sitting in that corner suite, blinds drawn, staring at the skyline that no longer belonged to him. Marlene tried to pivot. She called friends, begged allies, even wept in front of the women's club she once ruled. They didn't comfort her. They whispered. They remembered her sharp tongue, her arrogance. Now she was a story, not a leader. A woman who sold out her family for cash and got caught. And Brian, poor, reckless Brian. His scandals spread faster than fire in dry grass. The photos hit national feeds. His wife left him that same week. Papers filed fast. His so-called friends vanished. The country club revoked his membership with a polite letter that might as well have been a knife. He stopped shaving. He stopped showing up anywhere that had light. But disgrace wasn't enough. Not yet, because I had saved the cruelest truths for last. Sam delivered the final package to me in a brown envelope. He slid it across the diner table without a word. Inside were 3 files, each one thick enough to choke. Tax fraud, hidden debts, insurance scams. Every crime tucked behind their shiny smiles. Release them? Sam asked. I tapped the stack. Not yet. Timing matters. We waited. We let them squirm. We let them believe the storm had passed, that maybe they could rebuild from rubble. That's when I made the call. The press conference was arranged at City Hall. Not by me, by the foundation. A public unveiling of community grants, scholarships, new housing projects funded entirely by the assets my children thought they'd inherited. Reporters gathered, cameras ready, microphones bristling like bayonets. I stood at the podium. Behind me, banners of the Carver Foundation stretched tall and proud. My children slunk in the back of the room, faces pale, clothes rumpled. They thought they could blend into the crowd. I cleared my throat, the microphone catching every word. This foundation, I said, exists because sacrifice built it. Not greed, not betrayal. Sacrifice. Applause rippled. Flashes lit the air. And because sacrifice deserves truth, I'll share some. I opened the files, held them high so the cameras could drink them in. Victor Carver, indebted beyond repair. Funds siphoned to gambling rooms while employees went unpaid. Marlene Carver, architect of phantom companies. Fraud in her own hand. Brian Carver, reckless, disgraced, living on lies. Gasps. Shouts. Reporters lunged forward with questions. Phones buzzed, recording every syllable. I let the noise swell, then dropped my final line. These aren't just my children. They are proof that inheritance without integrity is nothing but rot passed down. And today, I bury it. The room exploded. My children staggered out, chased by cameras, swallowed by the noise of their own ruin. I stood still, calm, as if I'd been waiting my entire life for that silence inside me to finally echo loud enough for the world to hear. But it wasn't finished. Because humiliation is temporary. Poverty is permanent. And I had one final move left to strip away the last illusion they clung to. That move would land soon. And when it did, they wouldn't just lose money or reputation. They'd lose the ground beneath their feet. The thing about revenge, real revenge, is that it doesn't end with applause. It ends in silence. In the hollow space where their voices used to be. After the press conference, the Carver name was poison. But still, my children clung to one last illusion. The house. The mansion I built brick by brick, room by room. They thought it was untouchable. That no matter what I stripped from them, those walls would stand as their fortress. They were wrong. I had signed the deed to the foundation months before they ever tricked me into those papers. Legally, the house had never been theirs. It had only been on loan from my patients. So I chose the cruelest delivery. Saturday evening, a community fundraiser. Balloons tied to the gates, children playing on the lawn. Families gathered in the same dining hall where my children once toasted to their imagined victory. A banner hung across the porch. Welcome home to the Carver Community Center. My children arrived uninvited, red-faced and frantic. Marlene shouted first. What is this? I stepped forward, steady, no cane, no hesitation. This, I said, gesturing to the laughing children, the neighbors filling plates from tables lined with food, is what the house was always meant for. Not greed, not vanity. People. Victor lunged at me. You can't. I already did. Brian's eyes darted over the banner, the smiling volunteers, the cameras flashing as reporters captured every desperate second. His voice broke. Where are we supposed to go? I looked at him. At all of them. And I let the cold truth cut clean. Anywhere but here. Silence spread, heavy as stone. Guests looked away. No one rushed to help them. Not this time. Marlene whispered, almost to herself, You've ruined us. I leaned close enough for only them to hear. No, you ruined yourselves. I just turned on the light. And then I walked inside. The music swelled. Children laughed. My name was spoken with respect, not pity. Behind me, my children stood outside the gates of the house they thought they owned, watching as it filled with everyone but them. That was the final strike. Not death, not prison, something colder. Exile. And as the doors closed behind me, I said the last line of the story I had been writing all along. I left them the house, but without the doors,